Okay, looks like we have a good group logged on. So thank you everyone for joining us today and good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, The Greatest Knowledge Management Tool in the History of the Human Race After Action Reviews with Ed Kless, Senior Director, Department Development and Strategy from SAGE. My name is Lauren Hogan and I'm a marketing specialist here at JMT. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before I turn it over to Ed. If you have any questions during the webinar today, please go ahead and submit them into the Q&A section as you think of them. We'll save them all until the end of the presentation, but don't hesitate to submit them as they come. And we'll also, just as a reminder, send you both some handouts and the recording of this webinar within 24 hours after it has concluded. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Ed, to get us started.
All right. Thank you so much, Lauren. Looking forward to sharing this material with you folks today. This will probably not go the hour today, which is, I hope, okay with everybody. But I think there's a lot of meat to the presentation, and certainly something worth digesting. I will also just try to be a little bit more aware of the question panel as we're going along. We will take them at the end, but certainly if you've got something during the presentation, drop it in there and maybe I can address it in context as well. So that's totally appropriate. Just for those of you who want to connect with me on Twitter or LinkedIn, Ed Kless, very easy to find, at Ed Kless on Twitter. Now, the title, right? I get it. That's the greatest knowledge management tool in the history of the human race. Yes, I actually believe that this is what I'm going to share with you today is the best way to manage knowledge inside any kind of organization. So let me first talk a little bit about some of the background for this presentation and why I think this is so important. We have this is a list of key resources in the world today. We have our natural resources, what are called produced resources, which are financial and structural. We sometimes talk about this in terms of capital formation, right? Financial capital, as well as structural capital. Structural capital is the stuff in your organization that is still there after the people leave. So the building certainly is structural, but even more importantly, things like your computer network, your customer list, your donor list, all of those things are considered to be structural capital. What would stay inside the four walls or even virtual four walls of the organization when the people aren't around. And then we also have this thing called human capital, and human capital is really composed of two different subcategories. One is the social capital. Social capital is what your grandmother used to say it this way: it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so your ability to have a network of people that you can rely on, and this certainly includes things like the folks that you work with inside your organization, but it neatly also includes things like JMT and of course SAGE, and you have now had exposure to me from a social standpoint. And who we know is oftentimes more powerful than even what we know. And what I think is important about this form of social capital is that there's no way to take it away from you. I mean, you can get rid of your social capital by not being a nice person to other people. But for the most part, once you develop social networks and connections with people, there's something that stay with you the entirety of your career and even perhaps life. This last form of capital, otherwise known as intellectual capital, is knowledge. There's another way to say this is knowledge, the knowledge that we have. And what I think is most interesting about this, and this is a survey that is done by the World Bank, and this was done in 2017. And what they look at is how human capital is the largest component of wealth in high-income countries. You can see that and certainly the United States would be considered high-income country, that their estimation is that over 60% of the wealth is actually these connections that we have with other people and the knowledge that we have, far and above this. And I think Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate from back in the early 1900s, put it this way. He said, look, if you take away my factories, I'll rebuild them in 6 months and they'll probably be better. If you take away my people and leave me my factories, I've got nothing. There's nothing that I can do with that. I would not be able to rebuild. It would be absolutely impossible. And I think he was an early proponent and recognized this importance of human capital and knowledge and why it's so important to us. So today, what I want to share with you is, I think, the best tool for making sure that we can share that knowledge among the organization. And I'm talking about what's something that's called the After Action Review. The After Action Review was developed by the United States military in response to many of the let's call it debacles, that might be the best term for it, that happened during the Vietnam era. And it took almost 2 decades for the After Action Review to proliferate throughout the military. Different branches of service call them different things. In fact, I'm going to introduce you to someone who calls it the debrief. But for the most part, the After Action Review is something now that is absolutely ubiquitous in terms of military culture in the United States. In fact, I had someone participate in one of my webcasts a number of years ago who had done 2 tours of duty in Iraq, and his joke was that if we changed the toilet paper on the latrine, there was an After Action Review done about it. Like I said, it's become a cultural norm inside the organization. And one of the big reasons why I think it's so important is that I believe that the After Action Review alone can replace annual performance reviews inside an organization. In fact, I think they're multiple orders of magnitude better. I find personally that annual performance appraisals are usually, in most cases, completely disastrous, and that's when they're done at their best. I find them completely useless and really. And by the way, there's absolutely no evidence that annual performance reviews do the thing that they're intended to do, which is increase overall performance of an organization. No evidence of that whatsoever. Whereas there's ample evidence that After Action Reviews do, in fact, increase the overall performance of an organization. So before we get to the After Action Review and what it is, I want to share with you a story. And this is a story of my friend Chris. Chris is the one in the little chair there that you see in the middle of the screen. Chris has the distinction, if you will, of being the only pilot for the Thunderbirds to ever eject mid-flight during an air show. And this is a picture of him doing this somewhere over Utah, I believe. He ejected, as you can see, he was 40 feet above the ground. The aircraft was a half a second from impact. His total flight time was 25 and a half seconds from wheels up to impact of the plane back down. He was executing in a maneuver where they take off right away and they go straight up and then do a loop. Quite simply, he didn't go high enough because of an error that had been done in the calculations that was fed to him before the show. And as a result, he knew that coming down, there was no way for him to get enough so that he could pull the plane up before it would impact the ground. And what I think is interesting is that while it was 25 and a half seconds, to him, due to what's called temporal dilation, it felt like 3 hours. That's how long this process felt to him because of all of the things that he has to execute. He's written a book called Survivor's Obligation where you can read his story. And the story of this 25 and a half second goes on for about 40 pages. So this is, all of the things that were going through his mind and that happened in this incredibly compressed period of time. And one of the things that happened to him is he pulled the ejection seat, and he said that his mind didn't realize that he was doing it. His body did it through complete instinct and automatically, due to the education that he had in the military, including the thing called the After Action Review. What's absolutely incredible for this, and this is the last statistic that you see here, is because of the impact, which is not normal that you are ejected at such a low altitude, 40 feet above the ground. Chris's parachute did not fully deploy, and he landed among the wreckage of the aircraft and the inferno that ensued. He compressed his spine by 2.5 inches. He is 2.5 inches shorter than he was than before this accident. The doctors don't know how this is possible. They said there is not physically 2.5 inches worth of material for a spine to compress, so they're not quite sure how this all happened. And most amazingly, he didn't even realize that it had happened until after a day later, when his wife showed up and he was able to actually get up and walk away from the crash. But he met his wife and he went to hug her, or she went to hug him. And that's when he realized that he was 2.5 inches shorter than he was, because something was completely wrong. Really fascinating story. Highly recommend the book. But he's written extensively on this, and he says, how do you take does a military take a college-educated graduate and turn them into a fighter pilot? And his answer is using the debrief and the resulting lessons learned, aka this thing called the after-action review, which I'm going to take you through today, as an experiential accelerator. So the example is this. This is hopefully this you're able to see this in motion. It's just a graphic of the Thunderbirds executing what is one of their classic moves. And I don't know if you can even see this on the graphic, but this is two planes that flying by. One makes a left bank, the other makes a right bank, and they pass each other within 4 feet of one another. And what I think is most interesting about the maneuver that they do here is that the Thunderbirds have 50% turnover every 2 years. The squad is, I believe, 16 people, and they get 8 new people every 2 years. But yet they're able to help take them from, yes, they are already fighter pilots, to executing this maneuver in 4 months. And that is because of the use of this after-action review, this ability. And here's some of the statistics that they have come up with. Again, this is as measured by the Thunderbirds on this. 33% of organizational objectives are only 30% of organizational objectives are achieved. So this is within outside organizations. If you learn from the School of Hard Knocks, as we like to call it, you get a 5% improvement. Unstructured AARs, meaning just putting the AAR into practice, will get you a 25% increase. So in other words, a 5-fold increase over the School of Hard Knocks. Using a structured AAR, which is what I'm going to teach you right now, gets you about a 38% increase. And if you have an extraordinarily competent facilitator of AARs, you're up to 300% increase in organizational objectives achieved. Because it's not just about debriefing. I've mentioned this before. It is really about inculcating a culture of debriefing inside the organization. And I think this is a huge management innovation. So enough about the background. What I'm going to take you through now in the next 20 minutes or so is specifically this notion of after-action reviews and how to conduct them inside your organization. And I'm going to do that by leading you through the agenda of an after-action review. And you will get a copy of this, by the way. I sent out the document in Word format, so you'll be able to make adjustments to this however you like. So the first question that I often hear is, all right, well, when do we conduct an after-action review? And what I'm going to share with you today is, again, a formal after-action review process. And my suggestion is that you do this whenever you've undertaken some kind of a major project inside the organization. I would imagine that this would occur roughly 4 to 6 times a year in most organizations. So you would see that people would participate in after-action reviews on, let's call it, an every other month frequency. That sounds about right to me. But you can also do informal after-action reviews, where you take the basic framework of the after-action review, which I'm going to share with you in just a few minutes, and have them in 5-minute hallway conversations. And this is what I mean about becoming a inculcated and a cultural aspect of the organization that you belong to have these after-action reviews. Just again, before we go through the details on this, just a quick reminder, the chat or the questions would be more than appropriate for you to type stuff in so that I can answer any of the questions that you have for me as we're going along here. But without further ado, let's jump in and talk about this. What is an after-action review meeting? Firstly, what you want to do, obviously set out a date and time for this and a location for the meeting. And yes, it can certainly be done over a Zoom call like we're doing today. In fact, I think that the Zoom calls allow for really the increase in the number of after-action reviews that we conduct, because we don't have to have everybody physically present or even if they're not, we can still get them together and have it and do an effective job. What we want to do is make sure, and this is where that 300% increase when you have a competent facilitator come in, is make sure that you have somebody whose job is going to be the facilitation of the meeting itself. And what's important about this is it's probably someone who's not been intimately engaged in the actual project or circumstances that precipitated the after action review, because you want somebody who's going to be a little bit more emotionally neutral about it. And if someone has actively participated in whatever it is that you've been trying to get accomplished, it's sometimes very difficult to do this. So strongly suggest that you reach for an outside facilitator in doing this. Well, it doesn't have to be outside the organization, but certainly outside the department or group that you're working in. The second thing that I'm going to insist on is a scribe. Now, a scribe is not a court reporter. They're not going to take court dictation like you see on crime dramas where there's somebody taking down every word that is said. Well, we're not going to do that. The scribe has some very specific functions that we'll talk a little bit about as we process through. But ultimately, what their job is to make sure that we get through and have the specific outcomes of the after action review, which I'm about to describe to you. With regard to who should be at an after action review, it really should be anyone who actively participated in whatever engagement, project, matter, whatever you want to call it inside your organization, even if they had a small ancillary part in it. So for example, if maybe it's a project that you've done, you might want to have someone who was on the marketing team who was able to get that project done, even though that they weren't a fully active participant in it. So whoever may have even touched in some way the project inside the organization should be a requested attendee. I'm going to also suggest that you record these, that the after action reviews get recorded. And the recording is important because for a couple of reasons. One, so you can go back and listen to them after the fact. But even more importantly, with the transcription services that are available, it's very easy to take an after action review and transfer that over to a transcript that can be easily text searched on, and you can contain a library of after action reviews inside your organization that will allow people to go through and very quickly search and find perhaps situations that they're having in their current job that would allow them to find out, hey, where has somebody done something like this in the past, and what can we learn from that? Now, I'm going to highly suggest that you record them. This is probably one of the more interesting things about the after action review, and that my suggestion is that each person who's invited needs to bring, and my suggestion is 3, but you can make this less, fewer if you like. It can be 1, 2. I would say that 3 is about normal for most after action reviews. People need to bring 3 things that they think went well during the engagement, and 3 things that they think could have gone better. So it says at least. They can bring more. They certainly can offer more things. But what we want them to do is, and strongly encourage them to think about these things ahead of time, so that when we get to the after action review meeting, we're ready to go with that list of things. And you'll see why in just a second. Just taking a quick look over and see if any questions. Not seeing them. Okay, I'm going to move on. Now we're going to get to the meat of the after action review. This is where the learning truly takes place, and it's a series of questions that what I like for you to take in order. First thing, we're just going to quickly go through introductions, and everybody should introduce themselves. Even if this is a group of people that know one another already, I think you want to do this, and the reason is because we are recording these for posterity. People should introduce themselves, what their role was on the project, whatever they were completing, and that way it's written or been read into the record, if you will. By the way, I like to take a quick side note on this notion of a maximum time, rather than if you see agendas that are written this way, from 1 o'clock to 1:03, we're going to do introductions. From 1:03 to 1:08, we're going to do the next thing, etc. Don't like to see the agenda structured that way. Instead, use a maximum time, And what this does is this allows you to say, well, that's the maximum time we're going to spend on whatever topic is listed over on the objective side there. And if you spend shorter, you still keep to your maximum time and you don't yield the balance forward. What I find this does is it dramatically reduces the number of times that meetings go over, because if you manage to a maximum amount of time for a particular topic, it's much more likely that you get through the entirety of the meeting in a expedient way. Okay, so introductions. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to introduce the notion of the 4 basic ground rules for all after action reviews. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes in total on this, and I suggest that you do this as well until after action reviews do fully become part of the culture of your organization, at which time you can drop the after action review ground rules. But I like to bring them in and review them every so often, even in organizations that have been doing them a long time. Not a bad idea to every so often go back to the ground rules and review them. And there are 4. The first is that this meeting is for learning, not criticism. There are absolutely no personal attacks. So we can't personally attack everyone. I would hope that that's part of the culture of organizations, but sometimes it's not, and I think it's certainly worth saying. Now, this is different. We don't personally attack anyone. We can't say, Fred's a jerk. That would not be a nice thing to say. We can talk about the situation and mention Fred and say, Fred was unable to deliver on something. That's perfectly appropriate. That's not a criticism. That's not a personal attack on Fred. That's a statement of fact. And Fred might even say, yeah, I was not able to get that done, and maybe list a reason or have an excuse as to why it didn't get done, which might be part of the learning process that is going on for Fred and everybody else in the organization. But important here that we're making sure that there are no personal attacks that happen here. Second, and that is that no hierarchy exists inside this organization or inside this meeting. The military takes this extraordinarily seriously. In fact, when they conduct formal after-action reviews, it's common practice for them to take their hats off and put that, each of the hat has the insignia, the rank on it, and they put the hats face down on the table, indicating that as for this meeting, they are temporarily relinquishing their rank. And I think this is an important thing, that because what we want to make sure is that we're getting the best feedback that we possibly can from the entirety of the group. And sometimes the people who are the most junior in an organization often might have some of the best things that they can learn or they can share as an observation. And what we want to make sure is that this is part of the system, is that, hey, there's no rank here. I've already talked about this one, but it's always worth repeating. The facilitator and scribe need to be different people. They're 2 distinct roles in the after-action review meeting. The role of the facilitator is to keep the meeting on track from a timing perspective and to make sure that we're not going too deep into the weeds on different stuff, whereas the role of the scribe is to make sure that they capture the learning down over on whether it's on a whiteboard or on notes that they're going to share with people after the fact. Okay, and then the last thing is that we don't want to overanalyze anything. We always want to stay at a fairly high level, 35,000 foot view, as they say, and not get too granular into the situation, especially if this is a project that has gone on for a long period of time. All right, that's the setup. Here's what happens next. The first thing we do is we say, all right, what were our objectives for this thing that we did? I'm going to call it a project. Probably just the easiest way to use this to say, what were our objectives for this project? And if there was a formal project document out there, probably we could go to that and say, all right, let's read them. Like we can bring up the scope document from a project and say, all right, this is what we intended to do. But here might be a piece of learning. There might be the following response. What objectives? Nothing was formalized. That might be some learning right there. Maybe we should begin to better formalize our objectives when we start projects like this, so that we can come back at the end and say, were we successful against them? If there was no formal written document, I would ask the group to come up with the best guess at what were the objectives for this particular, again, I'm just going to call it a project. So blurt them out, write them. Maybe you can do some learning around crafting a proper objective, even if it's after the fact at this time. But let's get them down quickly. Probably wouldn't be any more than 5 objectives. That might be another learning that, hey, we were all over the place. We had far too many objectives for whatever it is that we were trying to get accomplished in this project. So again, good learning can be done just by asking that question early on in the after action review. And then this is really the heart and soul of the after action review. And that is taking you through these 4 questions. Well, it's really one question that's broken into 4 sub questions. And again, this is it takes about 30 minutes for this process to happen. The first thing we do is we say, okay, what went well? And what I want to happen here is I want each person to list the 3 things that they think went well. My suggestion is that you do this in reverse order of seniority. Yes, I know that no hierarchy exists during this meeting, but again, learning from experience and what the military learns is that they have the junior folks speak first, because if the major says, well, I think this, then what happens is the sergeants often say, yep, sounds like what the major said was correct. And what we want to do is flip that. We want to make sure that what we're doing is we're getting input from the more junior people. And this can be junior based on title. It can be junior based on the amount of interaction that they had in this particular engagement, or it could be just in terms of their seniority with the company, with the organization. The people who've been here the shortest period of time, they speak first in these meetings, because we want to see if they have any insight that they can bring to bear before we talk to the more seasoned folks. So what went well? And we listed. So say we have 5 people at this meeting that we've invited. Each person in turn is going to say, these are the 3 things or more that I think went well. And the scribe takes the list down. So they take the list. But notice that what they're doing is getting a very quick list. We want to keep this very fast-paced. This one, this one, this one. These are the things that I think went well. And then once we have the list, then we're going to have a conversation about the following question. Looking at these things collectively, why do we think they went well? What commonality did they have? And this is the insight that we're taking. This why question is, I believe, the great contribution of the United States military to the after action review. Understanding the why about the what is where we'll get our most insightful learning. And applying this during this after action review process really is extraordinarily valuable and helpful. Next, we're going to go. So once we do that, that should take maybe 10 minutes or so, leaving 20 for the thing that we spend probably most our time on in most after action review meetings, is what could have gone better. And again, people who come to the meeting have 3 things that they think could have gone better or more. Scribe's function, again, list them out. Let's list out what we think could have gone better quickly. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, here's the list of the things that we think could have gone better. Then looking at these as a group, why did these things go wrong? What about them? What are the characteristics? What are that they have? Commonalities. Was maybe one more significantly more important to the other, and let's focus our time there. And this is where the skilled facilitator role comes into practice here, to know which of the things that we want to push on and maybe perhaps spend a little bit more time on. Now, after we've done this, and again, this is a good 30-minute conversation, the next part of the meeting is to do this. Let's talk about what are we going to do differently next time. And I'm going to apply here. I'm going to leave 10 minutes for this, by the way, because I want there to be an argument, not in the sense of yelling at one another, but an argument, pros and cons, and really get it down to one thing. I'm going to apply what I like to call the Curly rule here. If you remember the movie City Slickers, and the great character played by Jack Palance of Curly, the cigarette hanging out of his mouth, and they're bringing the herd in, and Billy Crystal in his Mets hat at one point leans over and says to Buddy, Buddy, what's the secret of life? And he says, one thing. Billy Crystal says, yeah, but what's the one thing? He says, well, that's what you got to figure out. And the Curly, I said, buddy, the Curly rule is specifically this. What is the one thing that we collectively inside this organization agree that we're going to do differently the next time? Maybe what it is we're going to agree on a set of objectives before we begin a project. Maybe we're going to agree that what we need to do is lay out a communications plan that allows us to communicate more effectively as a group. Maybe it means that we're going to look and perhaps get an outside facilitator on something that we really didn't have the knowledge or skill to do inside the organization. So what is the one thing that we're going to do and it becomes a covenant really for the future of the business? What are we going to do differently the next time? And again, just one thing, which is why we're going to leave 10 minutes to discern that. And then lastly, we're just going to quickly go through and have each person rate the project and give them and say why they rated the score they did. I usually use a 1 to 10 scale, but you can use whatever you're comfortable inside the organization. So again, we go through and say, all right, what do you think this project was as in terms of success, 1 to 10? Well, I think it was an 8, and here's why. And then they give their reason, and then we just quickly go through each person who was participating in this. And then lastly, what we're going to do is, did we encounter, and this is also the role of the scribe, any specific follow-up items that were the result of this meeting? Now, this is different from what are we going to do different next time, all engagements. This is really more, we had this meeting and we learned that there were things that were incomplete about what we were doing for this engagement, for this project. And what we really need is a checklist of let's go back and make sure we accomplish this and accomplish this and accomplish this. So that's what we were looking for here. And again, the role of the scribe here is to do that. Well, we're ready to wrap up the meeting. And then, so what we do there is we say, okay, thank you for coming. Really appreciate this. And ask the scribe to do the following. Within 24 hours of this meeting, if you could please send out the list of the one thing that we're going to do differently next time, as well as any of the specific follow-up items and who needs to accomplish them, to the group of us who are either at this meeting, that would be great. And you ask the scribe, are you good with that? Is that something that you think that you can get accomplished within 24 hours? Scribe 99 times out of 100 says, yep, that's not a problem. All right, meeting adjourned, let's move on. And while this sounds short and sweet, and it is, I can't tell you the amount of learning in organizations that have put these into practice that they have come out with. And again, really, really excellent learning and organizational skills. And I've seen organizations make fantastic strides when they've built a culture of after action reviews inside them. As I mentioned, this is the formal after action review process. What also is the case is that there's the informal, which is just to take the objective question and the what actually happened and why was it different question, those two questions, and just have them in informal settings. And you can do this after a phone call. Hey, what was supposed to happen on that phone call? What actually happened and why was it different? Just those two questions that are asked oftentimes in hallway conversations, when people go out to lunch. I find these are a great moments for learning. And once this becomes part of your process inside your organization, you'll see things start to change, and amazingly at a pretty rapid clip. All right. If you have questions, now would be the time to get them in. I've wrapped up for the material today. Passing you on to a couple of things here. One, the source for my personal evaluation that if on this session today, if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes, jumping out to edkless.com/eval and filling that out for me, that would be great. Afterburner is the company that Chris used to work for. He's no longer there, Chris Strickland, the pilot, but they're the ones who've also developed this. If you're interested in perhaps working with them, I do a radio show with a guy by the name of Ron Baker, and we did a show on after action reviews. So you can go over and listen to that as well at thesoulofenterprise.com/AAR. Our interview with Chris Strickland, we've had a couple with him, but if you go to the same thing, soulofenterprise.com/Strickland, you'll be able to hear our interview with Chris. And I think this is the thing that's going to be sent out to all of you, so you don't have to go here, but if you really want it right now, before this gets out, but if you go to edkless.com/AAR, you'll be able to download the Word document of the after action review for use in your organization, effective immediately. So, Lauren, I think I'm wrapping up. As I said, I knew we were going to get through this material a little bit early today. I hope everybody's good with ending early, but if there are questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Ed, for your presentation, and just thank you again for joining us for the whole series. We've really enjoyed having you here at JMT and just being able to speak with everyone. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Don't forget to submit your questions into the Q&A. We can also, though, you have Ed's contact information, you have our contact information, and we would be happy to answer any questions following. Also, as a part, what was that?
Yeah, I just going to suggest if people have a question, if they want to raise their hand too and ask, that's fine as well. But if there are no questions, that's good too.
Well, I would just, if you do have any questions, feel free to submit them still. Just as a way of wrapping up the series, we also we just started a LinkedIn group. And we're going to send out a link for you to be able to join that through the follow-up email with the recording and the slides and handout. And so feel free to join that group on LinkedIn, and you can just continue your discussions together about strategic planning and just really any questions or communication you want to keep in touch with. But it looks like we don't have any questions come through, so I guess we can
either I stunned them or I explained it well. So let's.
Yeah. Well, we can go ahead and wrap up early then. Give everyone some time back in their day.
Outstanding. Well, thanks so much. Thank you to JMT for allowing me to do these presentations to this group. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great having you as well. So.
All right.
Bye, everyone.